Okay, now into the chapter. We're into chapter 2. This is the chapter is called Progress. He talks about the what's called rationalism, and rationalism was a denial of the Christian belief in the supernatural, a rejection of God, and again, essentially a rejection of orthodoxy. And he says that, and I'll quote, this is on page 23, "It is sufficient to say that rationalism was essentially a revolt against orthodoxy, and since the Christian worldview was the principal orthodoxy at the time, it was inevitable that it would be the target of continuous attack." And then he kind of summarizes it at the very end of the page. "Superstition, inherited wisdom, obedience to tradition, and supernatural metaphysics fell before the assumed power and authority of reason." So let me lay this out then. For the longest time, humanity was, in some cases forced, in many cases forced, certainly compelled, to believe in a set of values and cultures and beliefs, because that is what worked for that period of time. And so if you were an atheist 100 years ago and beyond, even worse for you beyond, or earlier, I mean, people would, and it's still today really, people think that you are unhinged and a barbarian. You would be essentially a pagan, and you couldn't be trusted because you weren't observing the panopticon kind of an all-seeing God who would judge you later. That judgment on a person's life was meant to control them. And this orthodoxy, this faith, right, was meant to control those people so that civilization can carry on, even if those beliefs had to be hedged and had to be interpreted, and well, we can't do everything that says in the Bible, and the Old Testament's horrible, and all this stuff, right? There still was this belief in, well, you've got to go to church, you've got to be a God-fearing man, just because it seems to work for us, and it holds everything together. Rationalism was meant to question those beliefs, those faiths, because they rest on nothing. They just have to be accepted, and that's it. There's no argument, there's no evidence, there's no basis. It's just faith, and that is it. And that was not acceptable to the rationalism or rationalists, who wanted to question these things. And they wanted evidence, they wanted proof, they wanted an argument to be made before you would accept anything. You just wouldn't accept something. There has to be a reason to accept it. There has to be a basis. So that was this attack on this way of life that seemed to work for a long time. And the question for us today is, and I accept that questioning these things was a good idea, but that doesn't mean that there was some kind of truth or wisdom that was captured in this orthodoxy. The problem is where is it? And can we extract it and distill it and use it in progress? You have to wonder that, yes, all of the things that Christianity and other religions have imposed on people, social behaviors and marriage and all these things, anything you could really name that's considered Christian or traditional, they either get rid of it or they hide it. But once you break that down and you can let people, you give them more social freedoms, you start seeing these problems come out that weren't problems in the past, because they were you either be ostracized or it was heavily regulated. And continuing this thread on rationalism, on page 26, he mentions that the classical period of Greece and Rome, that the people there did not exist a clear idea of progress as an inevitable and immutable movement of history. We find rather that there may be called cyclical theories. So in ancient Greece, this idea of progress was not inevitable, that you could actually create a decadence, you could regress, you could break society down and have a dark age. There is not an inevitable progress. It depends what you do. It depends what kind of social movements are afoot. And then now on the next page, he continues on rationalism. He says that heaven and nowhere else is where perfection will be found, according to the traditionalists, but to many of the rationalists, heaven can wait. Happiness and peace and moral rectitude will be established here on earth, and this can be done through the power of reason, which will be for all people what is allowed Newton and Locke to do, to understand the universe, to shape the environment, to control nature and themselves. So, of course, with this idea of traditionalism and Christianity, the earth is a fallen world, that man is a fallen being, and being on earth is a test, and it's temporary, and once you die you will be judged. That is, for most people today they're not orthodox. They don't really believe, like, they believe they're going somewhere after they die, but they don't think about being judged every day. The real orthodox, the real purists, they think about that. People in nunneries, I guess, priests, they probably think about that, but the average person is not that religious. But that was the old idea, is that this earth, like orthodoxy, believing in this orthodoxy, believing in this traditionalism, it's not perfect. Certain things, there's certain problems, there's certain kinds of warfare, and you can talk about the Inquisition and witch trials and all that. There's all kinds of bad stuff that happen, but there was this idea that, look, the world is not a great place. It's not going to be perfect. This isn't going to be heaven, so why bother? Why try? And the rationalists said, no, we don't need to wait for a heaven. We can use human reason to make this world a better place. Whereas the traditionalist view was that man is incurably base or incurably flawed. And because of the sins of Adam and Eve, I guess, we are stuck in this world until we are finished here. And there's no way of making it any better than what it is. But the rationalists, of course, want to actually try to do that. They don't want to be stuck to that orthodox. Just a bit of an aside now. This is on page 20. He talks about Malthus. You may know about Malthus. I believe he was the one who thought the world population would reach a certain capacity, and our ability to make food would not be able to keep up with our population growth. But anyways, he says here that this is a quote from, this is a paraphrase from Malthus, and I'll quote from the book. It says here that Malthus argued against ameliorating the lot of the poor on the grounds that an easier life led the poor to have more children, which led to fewer material resources to go around, which led to everybody being worse off. I have yet to see the people who consider themselves left-wing, traditionally left-wing. I have yet to see them discuss. They certainly talk about population control, but they don't say anything about forbidding welfare to the poor. They tend to be pro-welfare, which is interesting because if you look at who has children, I believe it's true that the poor tend to have more children and the rich tend to have none, or maybe one or two. And so it's a curious thing that I've yet to hear that argument made, that Malthus, who I'm sure would have been on the left, I have yet to see that. And he notes here Rousseau's idea of what he calls the cult of nature, and you may see some parallels here with modern environmentalism and Rousseau. So I'll quote, Rousseau argued that culture itself is more good than evil. Rousseau ridiculed the alleged advances of civilization. He spoke of the confusion printing had produced. He spoke of how philosophy contributes to moral decay. He argued that reflection itself is unnatural, and that a thinking man is a depraved animal. And continuing down the page here, he says, by the time he was through, Rousseau had created what might be called the cult of nature, had revealed the limitations of reason, and effectively championed the superiority of poetic insight and intuition, had raised his culture's consciousness of the uniqueness of childhood, had amplified the importance of the individual far beyond where the Renaissance had taken it, and we might say had fathered modern introspective literature. So Rousseau contributed this idea of humankind not being a superior animal and really being most at home with nature and least at home with civilization, which of course was a creation of man. There's some good remarks here, this is on page 32, about progress being something that is not to be had by technology, but to be had by our literature and our discussions of purpose and aims and social organization, things like that. So this is discussing Shelley, who was a poet, I believe. So it says here that it is only through love, tenderness, and beauty, he wrote, which I think is Shelley, that the mind is made receptive to moral decency, and poetry is the means by which love, tenderness, and beauty are best cultivated. It is the poetic imagination, not scientific accomplishment, that is the engine of moral progress. And now this is a quote of Shelley. The great instrument of moral good, he wrote, is the imagination, and poetry administers to the effect by acting on the cause. And then just continuing down a little bit, he says that it's the rationalist dreamed, the 18th century rationalist dreamed of, is not reachable through reason alone, and history will turn an angry face towards society that relies on it. Progress is the business of the heart, not the intellect. So this, again, this is, I just mentioned that because this is another reinforcing the point that our technologies are improving our weaponry or improving our medications or whatever. This is not progress. Progress is what we do with the tools that we have. It is far better to discuss and make clear and make better, whatever that might mean, better, our use of those tools, as opposed to simply making those tools better. Like asking the question of when we should murder might be a better, more progress might be had by discussing that question than the time spent sharpening spears, right? And now at the end of the chapter on progress, he discusses Immanuel Kant, which I think actually is a similar point that Herbert Spencer makes. But he says here that Kant's influential work to critique of practical reason argued for the view that morality is present in the intuition of our practical reason. We do not have to discover a new morality. We need only to recover that which is already at hand, thus suggesting that our moral universe is more familiar, accessible, and practical than is usually believed. Now, Spencer had this idea as well, that we can look around at how nature and even humanity functions, and we can find in it already a kind of morality. But to me, this really, to make it more modern, I think is talking about really common sense. That common sense is a good place to start with some of our moral questions. And in a sense, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can start with our own functioning. I guess you could say that we have survived this long. There must be something that we have had, that has let us survive this long. And that's actually also an argument often used against religion that says that before Christianity ever came about, we survived so far. So why would you suggest that all this stuff is a gift from God if God only really came on the scene and not that long ago?